Hello, have you ever picked a lock before? If not, and you are interested in learning how to pick locks, this may be the video for you. I'm going to be talking about how to pick pen tumbler locks. This is a pen tumbler lock. This is a pen tumbler lock. These are pen tumbler locks. These are all different pen tumbler locks. If you live in the United States, probably the majority of the locks you see on a daily basis are pen tumbler locks. And that's what I'm going to be giving an introductory video on how to pick. I'm going to be basing this on the spiel I normally give at the TOOOL conventions. This is just my personal video, though, and is not an official video of TOOOL in any way. This is just the spiel I've been giving at the conventions there, but is not in any way an official TOOOL video or an endorsed or sponsored video by TOOOL. Yep. So with that being said, I'll start off with a couple of rules. The first rule, and these are TOOOL's rules, and I think they're good rules to follow. Do not pick a lock which you do not own. That's often rude and often illegal. Not picking locks you do not own or do not have express permission to pick is going to save you a lot of trouble, keep you out of trouble. The second rule is do not pick locks on which you rely. That's also going to save you trouble and money and embarrassment. It's very easy to accidentally damage a lock, and you don't want to do that on your car or your door and not be able to use your car or your door and have to call a locksmith to spend a lot of money to get that repaired. There's a good chance they're going to know it happened and understand that either you damaged it or think that somebody tried to break into your house. So recommend not doing that. Even if you think that you're very comfortable with picking a lock at a certain point, if you're not exactly sure what the locking mechanism is on your car or your door, you may be picking something different. It may not be a pen tumbler, and it may be easier to do damage than you realize. So those are the two rules before we get started. So how does a lock work? Right here we have a clear cutaway of a lock. Let me take this key off the chain real quick. Sorry about that. There you go. So here's a clear view of a padlock. When we insert a key, what we're doing is we're lifting different pins here to the correct height. When all the pins in the lock are lifted to the correct height, we can rotate the key and open the lock. If you were able to see the inside of that, you would see that we have on the top here, these pins on the top are called driver pins. So this is looking at it from the front. And on the inside of the plug here, inside of there, we have something called key pins. So if we match it up with this view here, this clear outside right here, we would call the shell or the housing. It matches here. This brass looking face here is going to be the plug. It's going to match the black here. The pins on the top here, if you can see that, or the pins on the top of this plug here, those are all driver pins. They're called driver pins because they drive downward the key pin. They're driving it down. On the inside, if you can see inside of there, there's a pin inside the plug. That's called the key pin. That's because when you insert your key, those are going to be the pins actually touching the key. The key goes in the keyway right there. And then the last term that I will go over is an invisible one, and that's called the shear line. That is the space between the plug and the shell, or the plug and the housing. When that shear line, when there's nothing blocking the shear line, we can rotate the plug. However, when the driver pins are blocking the shear line, the plug doesn't rotate. And when the key pins are blocking the shear line, the plug doesn't rotate. Only when all the key pins are at the correct height and all the driver pins are at the correct height can we rotate the plug. And that's what the different notches on your key are doing. They're lifting all those different key pins and driver pins to the correct height so that we can rotate the plug. In a perfect world, this would be secure, and it would not be pickable. And there would be no special feedback between any pin. All the pins would be simultaneously blocking the plug from rotating perfectly in unison, and we wouldn't get any feedback from any single pin. However, what happens is when they're manufacturing these locks, they're not able to make them perfectly. There's slight deviations in the holes when they're drilling. They're not perfectly aligned. There's erosion. The pins are not all identical. The driver pins and the key pins are slightly different sizes. There can be wear and tear on them. And what that means is, at any given time when we try to turn that plug, that instead of all of those pins blocking it from turning at the same time, only one pin is actually blocking that plug from rotating. So what that means is we can go in and we can feel those different pins, and we can identify the one that's keeping it from turning, and we can lift it to the correct height. And when we do that, as we lift it to the correct height and we put a little bit of force trying to rotate the plug, what will happen is when we get it to the correct height, the plug will slightly rotate, and it'll keep that driver pin up at the correct height, and then a new pin will be blocking and binding the lock. Will be binding and blocking the lock, the plug from rotating. And then we go to the next pin and we feel it, and repeat that same process over and over again. But we are able to feel which pin is actually blocking the lock from opening at any given time. And that's essentially what allows us to pick a lock, is being able to identify an individual pin and move it at the same time and get that immediate feedback. And that allows lock picking. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump into an exercise right now. I'm going to be using these this progressive set, basic progressive set from TOOL. You don't need this set if you don't have it. Other sets I would recommend if you don't have the TOOL set is a lock that has these hex screws on the top of it, because these are easy to take apart and rekey yourself. You can unscrew these hex keys, or these hex screws. They're not screws. What are they? They're kind of screws, nuts. But you can unscrew them with an Allen key, and you can just dump those pins out, and you can just leave one pin right in the front, and that's the same as having a basic one, just a single pin in the lock. This is a training lock from Covert Instruments. That's a lockpicking lawyer's website. You can see it has those screws to do it. This is the Revolver from Sparrows. This is actually 4 locks in one. So you get 4 for the price of 1. And you can also repin this. You could have a 1 pin, a 2 pin, a 3 pin, and a 4 pin all in one. If you go to your local thrift store or Habitat for Humanity, you can also look for a lock like this. This is just I guess this is a thumb turn Euro profile lock, but really you can just look through their locks and see if any of them have these hex style screws on the top, and it's the same thing. You can just unscrew these, dump them out, and gut them essentially, and then just with a pair of tweezers you can add the pins back and the springs back and screw it back together on your own. So you don't need any real special tools there. A pair of tweezers and a Allen key set. So with that being said, I'm going to be using these this progressive set from TOOL. The very first exercise I like to do, so normally when picking locks we're going to use 2 tools. We're going to use a pick. So this is a pick right here. That is a pick. This is a pick. This is a pick. So there's a few different kinds of picks right there. These are all for lifting pins, and we also tend to use something called a turning tool. You can see some different turning tools here. Those are for rotating the plug, or for applying a turning force on the plug. So generally you're going to use these 2 tools to give you that rotational force and lifting force on the pins. For this very first exercise though, all we need is our pick. So we'll start with that. And I take a 1 pin lock, and the way I hold these is I will hold it, I will pinch it between my thumb and my knuckle, with the what they call the Bible here, this top rectangular piece, the Bible going towards my knuckle, or the keyway lined up with my knuckle. So that's generally how I will hold the lock, and I will hold the pick pinched between these 2 fingers, and I'll use my middle finger to sort of guide it, kind of like how you would hold a pen or a pencil or a chopstick. That's how I tend to hold it. And you can just go in and try to feel this very first pin in the front of the lock, without even using the turning tool. what you should feel is a springy feeling. And you see if I drag it off, you can hear it push back down. That's the feeling of a pen in its default happy state. When nothing, it's not actually blocking anything because we're not trying to turn the plug right now. That is just a default pen. It is not binding. When we're picking a lock, that springy feeling, that springy pen is a pen we can completely ignore. We don't need to worry about that pen. Lifting it will not do any good for us, so we can ignore it. The next thing we'll do, just for the video, or for this too, you can see, so that's what we're doing when we're doing that very first exercise. We're just lifting that pen and feeling it push back down with that springiness. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take one of our turning tools. And if you have a turning tool with two different lengths, you're going to want to use the long end of the turning tool and put it at the bottom of the keyway there. And then you can use your index finger to put some light pressure on it. You're not putting a lot of pressure. If you can see my finger there, it's just starting to get a little bit of whiteness around the edge of it, around the edge of the tool. It's about as hard as you would press a key down, like a keyboard key. If you are left-handed, you can mirror that action the exact same way and press on it like this. That's perfectly fine if you're using a lock that looks like this one in my hand, or if you're using this, or this, or this. However, if you are using a padlock like this, or this, any padlock, it's almost guaranteed that you're going to want to use clockwise rotations. You're going to want to press down like that. If you are left-handed, you may want to try to press up like this, or you may try to flip it over and use the small end of the top and lift it like that. So if it's a padlock and you're left-handed, you're going to want to make sure you have clockwise rotation. But otherwise, if you're left-handed, you can just, if you're using one of these, you can just mirror what I'm doing. Okay, so going back to this, we're going to put some light pressure on there, and we're going to keep that pressure applied. We're not going to let go. And we're going to take our pick, and we're going to go back to that very first pen again. And now we're going to try to slowly lift it. And one of the things you should very first feel is when you even try to push that pick in there, it feels like it wants to resist the pick a little bit. And when you lift that pin up, you'll notice that the plug rotates. It may just pop open real quick by surprise. But what you've done is you've caused that resistive force, that pin should feel like it's resisting you lifting it, and that's a binding pin, and you're lifting it to the correct height, and the plug rotates, and the lock opens. And that is an open lock. Congratulations if you're there with me and that's your first time opening a lock. You have just opened your first pen tumbler. And yes, I have seen one-pin locks in the real world, so they do exist. But yeah, you're trying to learn that feeling, and that's the feeling of a binding pen. That's what you're looking for when you're picking a lock. You're trying to lift the binding pins and ignore the springy ones. And while you're doing your one-pin exercise, I recommend doing one other thing with you while you've got it there real quick. So once you've got that lock opened and you lift that pin up, another thing you can do is you can feel that pin again once you've got the plug turned, and it should feel loose to you. That loose key pin is generally a sign that you have set the driver pin. It's not completely a guarantee, but it is a guarantee that you've either set the driver pin or that the driver pin is binding. So like if we look at it here with this, let me turn off that might help a little for the glare. So if I put a little bit of rotational force here and I lift up on this, it's binding, so that driving pin gets stuck as I lift it. If I lift it to the correct height, the lock will rotate like so. And here you can see there's the loose key pin right there. It is possible, if you don't lift that driver pin high enough, the key pin will be a little bit loose. So you may have to keep pushing that driver pin up a little bit more until you get that rotation. Yep. Okay, so once you've got that, that's the basic one. The next exercise is to go to a basic 2. So for these TOOOL ones, that's a 2-pin lock. So if you were working with one of these, you would add that another pin stack, another key pin, driver pin, and spring to the second chamber there. But this one already has it for us, so we're just going to keep going with it. So I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to get it pinched in my hand. I'm going to add my turning tool. I'm going to put light pressure again, and I'm going to go back with my pick. The difference is this time when I go to feel the pins, one of them is going to feel springy and one of them is going to feel binding. And that's going to be different for every single lock. Every 2-pin lock, any lock you go up against, you don't know the binding order in advance. You have to go in there and feel it and find out for yourself. So go ahead and take your pick, and go into the lock, and try to feel that very first pin, and try to feel that first pin and say, is this springy or is this binding? And to me, this is a binding pin. I'm not sure if you can see it there, but as I lift it, I can actually see it getting stuck, the very first pin. You can't always see that on the inside, but for this one right now, I can see, okay, it's getting stuck. And I don't get a very strong click when I get up to the height, but what I do feel is I do feel that pin stop. It doesn't want to keep being lifted. So I'm going to go ahead and stop lifting it there because I don't want to overset it. I don't want to I don't want to push so hard that I push that key pin up into the housing. I'm assuming the reason it's stopping is because the key pin is starting to hit the housing like that. Okay, actually that might have fallen back down while I was talking. I'll try to lift it up a little more again. Okay, and now I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to feel pin 2. Pin 2 felt a little, didn't feel like it was quite binding yet. I think I may need to lift one a little more. No, I've lied. I've already overset something. Let me start over. So when I let go of my turning tool, I'm resetting everything and the pins can fall back down. Now I can come back in again. I can try to lift 1. Okay, then I go to 2. I try to lift 2, and then I get that rotation like that. So you won't know in advance which one's binding. Once you start picking, you do want to keep that pressure on your turning tool. Like I showed, anytime you let go of the pressure on the turning tool, all those pins reset and they fall right back down. Yeah, and then you have an open. Yay! Another thing you can do when you're practicing too is you can take the turning tool and you can change the direction you're applying the turning force. You may have to hold the lock differently in an awkward position, like I'm holding it in an awkward position now to try to show this. But what happens is when you change the direction of your rotation, you also change the binding order. So now that I'm going counterclockwise and I try to lift the pins, if I go to that very first pin, I can clearly see that very first pin is springy now. Like if I try to lift it, I can watch it get pushed back down, and you can even probably hear that springiness getting pushed right back down too. So now the first pin is no longer the binding pin. I go to the second pin. I lift it. You heard a really strong click there. That's that pin getting set to the correct height. And now I can come back to the first pin and it's clearly stuck and binding, and I can lift it and rotate it. That can be kind of useful to sort of see how the binding order changes. And if you're having trouble picking a lock, you can try to change the way you're applying your rotational force with your turning tool, and you may find that makes it helpful picking the lock. Yeah, and once you've got that, I recommend I like progressively pinning locks. And you can go through, if you've already got these, you can go through and try the 3 and the 4. If you get stuck on one, go back and practice a little bit more from before. You can do the exact same thing with these training locks from like Sparrows and Covert instruments, or if you find one from your hardware store like this. This can be a little more economical than buying the set from TOOOL, because once you've really got a 1 and a 2 down and a 3 down, You're probably not going to come back to these and keep picking them. They're really useful for teaching other people, but economically they may not be the best choice for an individual who's just practicing with them by themselves. So you may want something like this where you can continue to repin it. I think some of these come with like security pins that you can practice with once you get a little more advanced. So those are all good options. If you're curious about the different keyways here, both of these I believe are using an SC4 keyway, a Schlag keyway. It's actually the same as on this one right here. I think the TOOOL one is using a Corbin Russwin keyway. I think that the TOOOL one might be slightly easier. The Schlag one is very, very common. It's a good one to practice on. Yeah, so you can see the keyways there. As far as locks practicing with at home, I know that master laminated locks have a terrible reputation of being super easy to open. I will tell you that I think that a lot of old laminated master locks, and I'm not the only person. I have met other people that feel this way. They can get really grimy and dirty, and they can feel, the way I would describe it is gummy. You're picking a gummy bear. The feedback can be really muted on these, so I personally don't love them as first locks to pick. They're not the end of the world, but the feedback can be a little harder. I think the same locks from Master, this like number 140 here, this brass one, provides significant, to me at least, my opinion is that it's significantly better feedback. Even though I think this is technically rated harder on Lockpickers United Belt Explorer, I would say the feedback makes it a more enjoyable and better learning experience. Other options, if you've got, I guess I would sort of warn, like you may have some old rusty padlocks in your basement or your garage. They're great to practice on because they're free, and free is always nice. But be aware that because they can be old and rusty, sometimes the key doesn't even want to turn them. So if the key, if you have trouble opening the lock with the key, it can be really hard to learn to pick that lock with tools. It can just be like a really rusty. The feedback can be really bad, and even if you've got it open, it may resist actually opening. And this is actually a padlock made by Ruger, and Ruger makes, in the United States, they make nice guns. They are not the nicest guns, but they make very quality weapons. They do not make quality locks. They sell. This is this is a bad lock. This is a very cheap, poorly made lock. It did not last very long as a garage or a shed lock. This is, I don't know, just an example of, this isn't Ruger though. This is American gun control issue, an American gun lock issue. But you can try picking it. You may have various results. I think these are nice ones to practice with when you're very first picking locks. These are kind of nice, rewarding. As far as picks go, there's definitely different places you can buy picks. I don't think you need a huge kit. The kits from Covert Instruments, the kits from TOOOL, they're very nice introductory kits. So I would recommend those. They come with a nice set of picks and turning tools. You will get a couple of these, which are a couple of hooks, which are useful for single pin picking. You will get this, which is a half diamond or triangle pick. This is, you can use this for single pin picking. I don't personally like it as much because I think it slides off the pins easier, but you may like it because it glides into the lock easier. Oh, that reminds me of something I do want to tell you about how much force to apply when you're using a turning tool. As a general rule, if you feel like you can't even get your pick in the lock, you're pressing down on the turning tool too hard. If you're bending the turning tool, you're pressing down on it too hard. And if you feel like everything is stuck in the lock, you're pressing down on the turning tool too hard. If you go in there and everything feels springy, then you're probably not pushing hard enough. There is a little middle ground on that turning tool where you're pressing, and only one of those pins should feel like it's binding. And that's what you're looking to feel, and that's going to take a little bit of practice. but I do want to mention that real quick. Okay, so going back to the picks, so you can use this kind of like a rake. Down here you see these are going to be some rakes. That's another style of picking. You can also use this as a flag pick for certain dimple locks. It's not designed for that, but you can rotate this and use it in that fashion. This is I think they call it a spoon pick from TOOOL's site. It's useful as a hook pick. It's very shallow. It can also, because it's fairly straight, be used on like tubular locks in a pushing motion. You can push those pins without worrying about bending or damaging the pick. So it's useful for that. These next two picks are examples of rake picks. These are called wave or cycloid rakes. They're for doing, instead of single pin picking where you're individually looking at each pin, this is for doing sort of like a toothbrush action motion on the pins. I try to do like a figure 8 motion. That lets me raise some of the back pins, raise some of the front pins, and as I'm moving in and forth, I'll get some of the middle too. So that's my personal preference. Some people do a scrubbing motion. I've seen some people do like a slamming motion then. I think one thing that is kind of universal is most people will tend to use light tension when they're doing that. So they'll put light pressure and they may even oscillate the pressure a little bit, bouncing the pick. And then they'll just sort of wave this guy in. And normally this thing rakes open very easy. Maybe he's going to feel a little camera shy. No, not too camera shy. So that's another option. However, raking is kind of, I don't want to say it's completely random, but it's much more random than single pin picking. So it's not reliable as you get to higher quality locks. It's going to have diminishing returns on the nicer locks. But it is a skill, and on certain locks it works really well. It tends to work extremely well on cheap wafer locks like you might see on a cabinet or something. So they have a useful place in the world of practical lock picking. Yeah, and then a variety of turning tools with different thicknesses is very useful. I think that it can be, you want a turning tool to feel snug in the lock. So like it may not fit, which is why it's nice to have a variety. Like this one's having a little trouble going there at the bottom, so I can go to the next thickest one, and I can put it there, and I can get it fairly snug. If I'm going to the top of the keyway, I could try that. I might try the thicker one at the top. See, does it go? Oh, it does. So I have a very snug fit at the top there. So that's why it's nice to have a few different thicknesses. The snugger that turning tool fits in there, the less likely you'll accidentally knock it out or something like that. So it's nice to have variety in turning tools. That is sometimes underestimated how valuable it is to have the right turning tool for the job. Yep. And since it's coming up on 30 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and stop there before this gets too long. But if you have any questions, if there's anything I missed, do let me know in the comments. It's supposed to be like a quick introduction, so not a ton of detail on a lot of things there. We didn't cover any security pins or anything like that. But if there is something you want to see, or if there's something you want me to answer in the comments, please feel free to add any questions. If there's something I misspoke about, please correct me. Yeah, any and all feedback is welcome. So let me know in the comments below. I will put links to where you can get some of these. I guess I'll put links to these different training stuff in the video and these picks if you're interested. Oh, and I guess the very last thing I'll close with is that TOOOL's it is nationwide, and there may be local meetings near you. So I would check out their website, especially if you're starting, and see if there's any meetings nearby you where you can meet up with people, because that's getting hands-on, one-on-one experience with other lock pickers is an invaluable resource, no matter like where you are picking locks, whether you're brand new or you're a seasoned pro. I think being able to meet up with other lock pickers locally is really nice. They're not everywhere. There's a couple meetings in Virginia where I am, but definitely check it out. You may find out that there's meetings nearby you that are worth driving over to and getting that meeting other people interested in the lock sport. So I guess I'll go ahead and end there. I'm sure there's more to cover, but I got to end somewhere. So I'll go ahead and stop. Yep. Thank you for watching.